Hello, friends, and welcome to this very special 100th episode of Snap Judgments. As always, I'm Roy Rogers, and joining me is my friend and yours, the one, the only, the CEO of the Snap Judgments Podcasting Network, the Sandworm Space Emperor of my heart and yours, the one, the only, Aaron Pulse Glazer. Pulse, my friend, how are you doing on this 100th episode of our show?
I get the intro I hate for episode 100, huh? The big fancy one? It's all right. We're going to be joined by the Space Emperor of Second Dinner, the Space Worm Sand Emperor of Second Dinner pretty soon. So I'm not feeling as bad about that part.
Well, I'm just glad that I've been doing we've had 100 episodes of the show, and I've recorded nearly 100 of them with you, and it is a very joyful experience each and every week to be doing this with you, my friend.
Thanks.
All right.
I really enjoy it.
This is, I said at the beginning, a really special episode, and the way Glazer slightly spoiled it there, we have very special guests today. So, Aaron, why don't you go ahead and introduce both our guests and regular contributors?
So, let's not bury the lead, right? Sorry, Gunny. We got Glenn Jones. You might know him as the guy who made all the cards you like playing in the game we talk about way too much. Hi, Glenn. How are you?
I'm great. Good to be back on the show. Congrats on 100 episodes. Great accomplishment.
Thank you. I've talked about Marvel Snap at least once a day on video for about a year and a half straight now. And
me too.
Yeah. You're better at it though. We are also joined by the king of tournaments, because that's what the T really stands for. It's GunnyT. Hi, Gunny.
Hello. How are you, Roy? Back on the show with you again. Seems odd because I'm just replacing you normally.
Well,
they have the same glasses. You can't see it, but they wear the same glasses, so you know.
I would say actually that's a little unfair to Gunny T's glasses. Gunny, yours are nicer than mine, but I appreciate
you make yours look better though.
Them. I don't know about that, but either way, we don't need to exchange compliments about things that our audience can't even see. What folks are not here for the useless banter of the regular contributors to the show. They have 99 other episodes, actually technically 98 because Glenn was on a previous one. But let's jump into what we're going to be talking about, which is this spotlight card we have for this week, which is Anti-Venom. All right. So thank God, the last symbiote card, right? All right? We're finally
Glenn,
done.
Roy hates symbiotes. If you're not aware of this, Roy absolutely...
It is a theme
cards,
problem, not a design problem. I love a lot of the designs, but no symbiotes, thank you. All right, so Anti-Venom, appreciate that, is a 4/7, Series 5, 6K tokens on reveal. Set the cost and power of your deck's top card to 0. Glenn, we usually talk about power level here. That's not really what you can really talk about, But where, this card, sort of what was sort of Second Dinner's thought process behind this card? Where do you see it fitting in the month? Sort of what was the approach that sort of led to this design?
Well, if you hate symbiotes, that's kind of something you and Anti-Venom have a little bit in common.
That's true.
So one of the things narratively that people may not know is that Anti-Venom was actually created in part by Mr. Negative. Mr. Negative affected Eddie and some of the residue venom to create this new symbiote, basically. So when we started on brainstorming designs, we wanted to try and find something that kind of winked at Mr. Negative in a way, which is a difficult thing to do. We generally like making cards that might go in a Mr. Negative deck because the deck's really fun, really popular, and not particularly deadly or dangerous. There's a lot of ways to interact with it if you really want to. But yeah, so we pursued a number of designs and wound up going with this one, which we think accomplished that goal of having a really distinct identity in what it was trying to do and could combo with cards that might not be very good with Mr. Negative, but also still can do some of the same tricks that he pulls with things like Iron Man and be very exciting in that regard. So yeah, we started it. I think it started at I want to say 512 was where we started. And then we just kind of knocked it around into a lot of different places and landed on 4/7 which maybe is a little light. I don't know. We've got some debates. It's a contentious card on the team. There's like a couple people who think the card's too good, a couple people who think the card's really bad, a couple people like me who are just like, this card's sweet, and we'll figure it out later. So yeah.
So not just you, even in the hands of top players, one of the things I do on Thursday's videos, which will be a few days before this goes live, but as I ask a bunch of top players, like the top of the Infinite leaderboard, what do you think of the new card? Because they all like immediately brew with it, right? And like some are like, this will disappear in a week, and some are like, oh, this is going to be great. I've got so many things to do with this. This is super strong. Like, this is a no clear answer card, which is always scary because by the end of the week I have to try and give a recommendation. It's like, here's how you should try and spend your money. But yeah, this card is like, the reviews for this card are all over the map. It's wild.
Yeah. Where it has been nice for us because we're at least like, oh yeah, it is hard. Like, because every now and then we're like, it feels like we should have maybe gotten this one, and it was like, no, this one was just really hard. We had a lot of fun decks, a lot of different ideas with it, and it's one of those. It's not. We have a saying in design, all numbers, which when a card's like all numbers, it's usually like implicitly going to be able to balance it. I wouldn't say this card's like all numbers in what it does, but it's like a lot of numbers. So we're confident it has enough dials to eventually find like the exact right spot for it in a variety of metagames if we want to kind of push or pull it around.
So Glenn, a lot of people have compared this card to Iron Lad.
So
when you all were designing it, was this something that you were sort of trying to explore that space? I mean, you did a good job, I think, of talking about how it connected thematically to the Anti-Venom character, with like a version of that is also in the new Spider-Man game, if folks want to see some of the lore around this character. But sort of like, what was the relationship with your design, but sort of between Iron Lad and that kind of space within sort of Marvel Snap?
Yeah, it wasn't deliberate to Iron Lad. They happened to kind of harken to the similar like incentives. Was just how it wound up being structured. I mean, we did start it at 5 cost. I think the 5 cost version might have even at one point drawn the card. I think we might have tried that. That's a very strong thing to do just in general, and has a lot of risk to it. So yeah, we knocked it around a bit, but we don't usually target cards to like line up specifically in that way. Generally, it's actually the opposite, where we're like, we want to make sure, hey, if I already like Iron Lad, will I also like this card? Will I have different things to do that will feel very novel? And we wound up feeling good enough about some of the like weird little tricks you can do, especially things like Mobius and Luke Cage feel like they interact very differently with Anti-Venom than they do with Iron Lad in a couple of ways. So we're like, okay, that's compelling enough to feel like this card is like its own. It has its own identity, can go in some decks that Iron Lad couldn't, and vice versa.
I've really, really liked, a few people have tried throwing it in decks with Grandmaster, and it's like, ooh, like you get the 2 free things. It's been really nice, and that works with Luke at the same turn.
That was one of the reasons we moved it down from 5. Was stuff like Absorbing Man and Grandmaster were pretty appealing. Just to try, like it was an exciting quest to go on, even if the deck wasn't always strong in the end. So we were like, yeah, we can just allow this because people want to make it work. Like when our playtesters are like, can I add magic to the deck to try and like do these things? It's like, okay, we can just solve that problem a little bit differently.
Yeah, perfect. Gunny, any thoughts on this one?
So one of my favorite things about some new cards, especially ones like this, is like the holy cow moments that can happen with it. I haven't got a chance to play with it myself, but I've been watching some of the videos, and it's really cool. Like a card like Speed, it's a very good card. It does what it does very well, but it's not super exciting, right? Cards like Anti-Venom can just create like holy cow moments that you weren't expecting, or new ways to play, and that's always like a very fun card to come out to me.
For me, it's interesting, like what Glenn said, that sort of like you wanted to ensure that it had like different space than Iron Lad. But for me, like where I'm most excited, I've said this in multiple episodes, is actually playing alongside Iron Lad for the redundancy, right? To sort of like, you have 2 powerful payoffs for having the top of your deck sort of be accessible to you. Sort of like that to me is like the most compelling thing about this card, and is why I'm currently like going back and forth about whether or not I want to spend my sort of 6K tokens I currently have. Is like the last card is like, that just sounds like a really fun and compelling experience to me, is because I find Marvel Snap most interesting when you kind of like have 2 versions of a similar thing, so you can like really build around it in a way, because it's all, decks are so much smaller than, say, Magic or whatever. So, you really want these sort of multiple effects if you want to build your whole deck around that, and sort of like all in top of your deck sort of payoff deck is now much closer to being a reality than it was last time. And for me, that's probably the most exciting thing about Anti-Venom.
Yeah, we definitely consider that upside. The line we want to make sure we draw is that, like, if someone wants to go off, there is a different path to go on, not just like this card's going to tread very similar ground. Like Agony and Hulkbuster, I think, are cards that you can kind of compare similarly. It's like those are very close, but there are just a handful of ways in which they're different, and in which a deck might want one or might want the other, and more to come in that way too. So that's something we really value whenever we're doing something that treads close to an existing card, is we want to make sure they have enough differences to stand apart.
Yeah, I think the shorthand I'm coming to for this card is it might have hidden uses, but the use it's going to have right now is once everyone stops playing Luke Cage because everyone's testing Anti-Venom, this is going to be amazing in Ajax decks. Like, Ajax decks are going to absolutely adore this card. Like a 0-cost man thing, sure, why not? Right? Like a 0-cost hazmat, a 0-cost, like any of that stuff is absolutely great. I think that's where we end up as like one of the main homes, and I love those decks, so I'm all for it.
All right. Any more thoughts about Anti-Venom?
Yep.
All right. So we have sort of 10 questions. 5 are from Gunny and Glazer. 5 are from our community. And Glazer, I'll let you ask the first question of Glenn.
No. These are Gunny's. Gunny, take the lead, sir.
I have been so excited to ask you some really cool questions here, Glenn. So bear with me. Some of these are a little bit wonky, a little bit crazy, but I would like to get your thoughts. The first question is, if Snap was going to have a crossover with a different game or property, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I've thought about this myself from time to time. I like a good crossover more than most. I worked on crossover IPs a lot when I worked on Magic. I don't personally feel like the game of Marvel Snap, like the exact rule sets, etc., benefits a ton from adding another IP to it. Like what, a card like take any random card, like Spider-Man or Iron Man, like, you could reflavor that to just be a different character fairly straightforward. Like maybe Iron Man's the Emperor in a Star Wars themed game, or it's Dumbledore in like there's a bunch of different kind of ways. There's not a really tight creative and narrative loop that the games go through. Like, you don't tell stories kind of the same way that a game like Magic or even Pokemon does. Like taking like Pikachu to Raichu or Charmander to Charizard has like a clear narrative arc that's really satisfying. But I do think that there's a lot of space to have like Snap inspired games, like for other IPs. I can certainly imagine like a game in the same space as Snap that has some little twists to it that make it like a much cleaner identity and tie it like really directly to its IP. So I think you could put a lot of things in, like, and there are tons of IPs that I really enjoy. I'd love to design any characters that I love from a variety of IPs. Certainly, I'm a big fan of any of the big ones. Like, I love Star Wars, love Pokemon, love Dragon Ball Z. Like, yeah, there's lots of cool IPs I think you could make really satisfying Snap gameplay with. A fun fact is we've actually occasionally used some of those IPs like in design tests, or allowed people to use those IPs for design tests.
Cool, thank you. All right, next question is, what is the most surprising strategy you've seen a player use in Snap?
The most surprising strategy, I think I forget who it was actually, and I know you probably know, Gunny. But I remember seeing somebody putting Loki into Phoenix Force decks, and I was like, oh, that's really clever to basically have this like mulligan jet, like ability where it's like, oh, I didn't draw Phoenix, but I drew Loki, and I can just like play a different game, and like I'm probably only like 45% to win this game, but that's a lot better than I was when I was just a Phoenix deck without Phoenix, right?
I remember that. I believe Glazer posted that deck on his channel. And then you also put Loki into your Dragon Force deck, right?
Yeah, I had a similar thought with it with Mr. Negative, which, you know, conceptually they line up very similarly, right? Like, oh, I didn't draw Mr. Negative, I'm going to lose. But, you know, mulligan. And Phoenix Force was certainly one we never considered internally might be a deck that works exactly like that. But it turned out to line up fairly well. And I don't think it's a coincidence that like both of those decks have 4-cost linchpins, because it's kind of like the same point in the game at which you are like, I don't have it or I do have it, and you can make the decision really easily.
Yeah, at that time for sure.
Did you see the Misery Phoenix Force stuff coming?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Nice, because that was like when that actually worked in the Darkhawk shell, I was like, oh my.
I think that was like the first Misery deck I built. Actually, it was a Phoenix Misery deck. I'm a Phoenix lover, so I'll often try them out.
Nice.
All right, we'll go to next question here. What Marvel Snap character do you think would be the best Marvel Snap player, and why?
That's a fairly interesting question, since there's so many people who would totally be cracked if they chose to be, like Professor X, for example. But Professor X would have like an ethical issue with using his abilities in that way, probably. So I think a variety of villains are very reasonable options, since they would be willing to cheat. But I thought an interesting one might be Prodigy, who is a young X-Men who has the ability to absorb the knowledge and skills of the people around him, and it's involuntary. Yeah. He can't choose to not do it. So even though he's a heroic character, he would cheat just by virtue of being there.
Yeah, the missing young Avenger.
He's in NYX right now, for those of you who love Prodigy.
I guess I need to read
some NYX. He's had an interesting story.
Yeah, after a few months of playing, he'd be the best player ever.
It's true. Does Peter Parker's Spider Sense trigger for bad plays? Like, would Peter and Miles
probably
be like, yeah.
At least for bad locations, right? Like, oh no, that's going to be...
Maybe it only turns on when like you're about to be eliminated from the tournament. Like maybe your first loss, the Spider Sense is not really there, but then it's like, oh wow, now we're up against the wall.
Would Kang make the most annoying Marvel Snap player, always rewinding the turns?
Oh yeah, that sounds right. I think Peter Parker would be a pretty annoying first player if you could talk to him.
It would just be Reed. Reed would be the most annoying. He would just be like, I knew you were going to do that every play. It'd be the most obnoxious thing ever.
All right, number 4. Can you share a memorable moment from Snap development?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny one, because I joined Snap after its release. So in some ways, like my history in the players like kind of have seen a lot of the same stuff that we have. So I was trying to think like what might be a good internal story we haven't called out. And one thing that kind of came to mind actually was High Evo actually predates my hire. Like they had designed High Evolutionary before I was hired to work on Snap. But I think 2 of the cards in the package were in some ways like inspired by the design test that I had submitted for the job. And then like when we came back on, like tuned them a little bit. Evolved Abomination, I know specifically I had on my design test. I believe it was a Mewtwo, was because I was asked to design a Pokemon card.
Okay. Cool.
We all thought Evolved Abomination. Wait, sorry, hang on one sec. We all thought Evolved Abomination was to be the most broken thing in the world, and everyone was like, "You'll never play Evolved Hulk." And when it immediately was reversed, everyone was like, "Oh." Like, I like to try and keep track of these because everyone's always like, "How'd you get that card wrong?" Like, we get all the cards wrong. You cut that out. No one knows until they start playing. Well, you know, but like you get to design them. But all the players are like, "We think this is broken." It's like no one knows until we play it. Relax.
All right, and our last question.
Often the case. Yeah.
Our last question comes from Glazer.
Oh. So, how much attention do you play to the Infinite Leaderboard, and what do you think of it? I really love the Infinite Leaderboard, so that's why I asked.
I actually don't look at the Infinite Leaderboard much at all. I do review the feature. It is a feature. I was actually the product owner for the earliest version of the leaderboard, and I do have like some improvements I want to make to it that we're kind of trying to find the right slot to get in with all of these high voltages and Deadpool's Diner and unannounced game modes. So trying to find the development time for that. So I pay attention to it actually a lot more from like a structure and like how can I make it a better experience for players' perspective. But who's actually like on it and what rank and things like that, I mostly only get through Twitter. But I do check in on like what those players are playing through our back-end data tools. Like I very often will check in on like the top 0.5% of players specifically to see like what decks they're playing and what trends are developing. I have some charts built up that specifically can help me contrast the data from that set of players with the data from the larger group, so that I can see like, what are cards that are performing really well at high MMR and worse amongst the general population, and try and figure out like, why is that? Like, does that mean the card might want to buff? Does it mean it might want to nerf? Like, it can mean a lot of different things depending on what's going on.
Is there anything you can share of that you think is interesting and different?
I mean, nothing too novel. I mean, that is one of the reasons that we made the Shadow King buff recently, which was like a contentious buff. Yeah. It was a lot more performant amongst high MMR players than the wider MMR players. And part of that was play rate to some extent. And so one of the things that we thought the power would do was just make it a more appealing card for people who were maybe struggling in the metagame to find something that was like going to help them in some tough matchups. And it was like, no, this card is good. Like, it will help you. Because it's, for a lot of players, they see a 2/2 and that can actually be a really tough sell just on the face of it. Even when the effects are strong, it can be difficult for people to kind of recognize and forecast what the in-game strength of a card will be for the wider audience. Obviously, like the higher MMR players, like they're perfectly willing to make those kinds of sacrifices or figure out if they should.
So, true or false? Sometimes a +1 power in OTA is just a, hey, look at me, I'm still good, play me.
I would say it's rarely just that, but certainly like has been that from time to time. Sometimes it's just like we think, nobody's playing this card. It's a fun card. Like, let's just give it a power and then see how it goes. Like, that's a fairly light risk. We kind of we think about the OTAs as kind of wanting a variety of, imagine you're skipping stones, right? You want to throw a few small ones and not that many big ones, but you do want some big ones. So we like to have a few things that might cause a ripple or might do nothing. And it's fun to have players like chat through them and experiment and try and figure out like what's truly changed and what hasn't.
Very fair.
Nice.
Any follow-ups to any of these, or are we on to the next file?
No, we're on to our community submitted questions here. So the first one comes from Scott Cabernet. What other games are you currently playing, and do you draw inspiration from them?
Yeah, I don't play a ton of games like really regularly. I play Hearthstone Battlegrounds a decent amount. I've been enjoying Once Upon a Galaxy, which is a game in beta that's pretty fun if you like Storybook Brawl. And I liked Balatro. I was traveling recently, so I played a bit more Balatro than usual. But I play a wide range of games, like a handful of times, or just try something new, or somebody recommends something, or there's a system that's interesting. I'll play it once just to kind of get the idea. Or sometimes I'll just read the rule book and write down a few things. So I spend really about as much time studying as I do playing these days, just to kind of like continue pulling in ideas. And yeah, like certainly the main goal with that is to be inspired to see some connections and think like, what do I like? What do I not like? How would I have solved this problem that they encountered? So I do that kind of thing a ton. I probably, I don't know, maybe there's somebody who knows the like more CCG rule sets than I do, but like I know a lot of them because that's a specific genre I really study just very heavily.
I imagine. I see some of your tweets about Magic the Gathering. Are you a big Magic the Gathering player, or have been in the past?
I have been in the past. I worked on Magic for about 7 years. And then before that, I was like a light competitive player, played and did poorly in a handful of Pro Tours. But always liked Magic, played a lot of different formats, played mostly Commander by the time I had quote unquote retired. I don't really play much anymore. Just every now and then a set comes out, I'll do a few drafts, that kind of thing. But I still love it. It was kind of my intro to games, really, because I learned Magic before any of the other games that I wound up really playing. Even video games, like I played like with my Game Boy for a bit, and then it was Magic like almost after that immediately.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I've been playing that game for about 25 years or so now, but Commander is pretty much the only thing that I do now. All right, on to our next user submitted question. It is user BV9. What cards are you most proud of?
I'm proud of a lot of cards. I'm honestly more proud of the process I've developed, but that's a pretty boring answer. I just love process. But Nico Minoru is a card I'm particularly proud of. I like that one. It was really sweet. It was the kind of card that didn't necessarily line up really clearly with what some of the design group at Second Dinner imagined Snap to be. So it kind of represented, really a change in how we were going to approach some seasons and cards and themes. And seeing it succeed was, a really nice, great, this is going to work. Like, we can do more cards in this space. We can kind of really expand what it means to be a Marvel Snap card in a way that keeps the identity of Marvel Snap as like an accessible, exciting game, clean. But we can kind of push on what the range of complexity we're going to allow is.
Nico is a very cool card. I would have to agree.
It is.
It's my most played card of the past year.
It's probably my favorite card. It's the one only one I've spent a custom border on. I have very sweet.
Wow.
You just sit on all those custom borders.
You're handed custom borders now all the time. You just got to stockpile of custom borders.
They're just sitting there. I'm just like, but I got the perfect Nico variant. Like, I love that card. I would play it all the time.
All right, this is a very cool question by Max6560. What is the most broken card you ever tested? And I want to hear, like, you put it in and you're like, oh no, we can't release this. We need to change it.
Yeah, it's funny because honestly, we put in cards and then like throw them away a lot. Like, I don't think people know really how much iteration we do. One of the more memorable, like, recent ones was actually the very first RSM was just 7 cost, fill all of your empty slots with random cards. And we put that into a public playtest before. Sometimes we'll do a smaller playtest before a larger one with the rest of the team, to see if we really want to send some stuff there, because it can be hectic. But that one we wound up not having time to, or for whatever reason, and we just sent it to the larger group. And it was a pretty chaotic playtest. Very, very fun. But yeah, the card was totally ridiculous as predicted. There were a lot of games where people would just oh, I'm winning, and then it's like, oh, Destroyer, and like I'm losing, and then like, Arnim Zola, and it's like, oh no, maybe, and no, yeah. So it was just one of those like big high roll cards. So it was hilarious. But yeah, we quickly eliminated the card. Didn't bother testing any variations on that particular idea.
Cool.
Fair enough.
Another part about testing here, Corrier wants to know, what is the system for testing new cards? Like, do you have a God mode that enables you to stack your hand or put certain locations out? What does the back end look like for when you're making a new card? Not necessarily the card itself, but like the system you're using.
Yeah, we have some things like that. We don't really use them for playtesting particularly often. They're actually mostly tools for our QA team to use to make sure that the cards work once we're done with the playtesting. We like to really try and simulate live environment as best we can. We do a little bit of it, like if we're trying to check out particular combos to make sure we like the interaction, or like, if the card's good, if you always have it, if it's too good, if you always have it on turn 3, like that kind of thing. But for the most part, we tend to just play the games straight up and let the chips fall where they may. We do sometimes ban a few locations or a few cards, like to just get them out of the pool if they would mess with things. We do that passively with internal playtests, for example. Like, we don't tend to put a lot of stuff like Spider-Ham or Iceman or whatever into our playtest decks internally, because it's just going to mess with our ability to actually get a gauge on the cards we need to check. We already know how Iceman works. So that's the most like kind of cheating we kind of do with it. Beyond that, systematically, we kind of basically come up with cards in groups, and we'll kind of implement them all at once, and then do a build of the game that's just distinct and has cards that aren't released on it. So it takes probably between like an hour, 2 hours to put a card like into the build, and then some number of cards you can build in like 2 to 4 hours or so, like with a new client. So basically, that's a good chunk of our week is figuring out what the cards are going to do, implementing them, and then we'll set a build to go off overnight, and the next day come back and play and maybe go at it again.
I have a follow-up. I don't know this, but certain buffs sort of seem like they go with new cards and make new cards more interesting, like Yondu for Zemo type things. Have you ever buffed an older card that you weren't planning on buffing before a card released and been like, oh, that interaction wasn't what I expected, or oh, that's way stronger or weaker than I expected now?
I can't think of one where we did it like accidentally. We're usually pretty purposeful with those things. We'll wait. We don't usually like. Sometimes if a card is underperforming, we might try and target a slight rework or tweak. Like that was the case with Yondu, where even the destroy decks that had used to play Yondu had largely stopped. So we would try to find a way to give him another identity alongside Baron Zemo, and the decks we played internally that were doing that seemed fine. But yeah, I can't think of one where we were buffed and it just kind of took us off guard that the cards combined that way.
Okay. Another quick follow-up, Glenn. So when you said you test cards in groups, do you like test the season pass, like all of the symbiote cards? Are they tested together, or is it just like whatever your team cooked up that week, and then later on someone in the product team just sorts them into different things, or is it?
No, yeah, we do use the seasonal structure. The design team makes the seasons. It's a collaborative process to arrive at what the themes will be. And we also work with the art team deciding characters and locations and what we think will best represent that theme. And then as far as the playtesting structure goes, we use a kind of a rolling schedule. So at any given point in time, there's at least 3 seasons that are all being playtested in some way. So all the symbiote cards are getting played together, but they're also getting played with the Spidey cards, and then the Spidey cards finish, and then the symbiote cards are with the next season, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it varies. Like right now, our playtesting is focused on the cards releasing from March through May of next year. We might be about to start June as well. I don't think we've played with a June card, but we're very close to starting those.
Very awesome. Cool. Thank you for the insight.
Yeah. All right, and then the last one here, you ready to shake up the whole metagame, Glenn? We've already kind of got one answer with the Shadow King, but this is from Joshua Miller. What card or archetype is the community sleeping on?
Right now, I actually think the community has identified a lot of the good stuff. I was, going through the data a little bit today, and there weren't a ton of things where I was like, people don't really see what's going on here. I did notice there was a small number of players who were putting Valentina in their Sarah Miracle decks, and it was performing quite well for them. And I saw Baron Mordo in a Darkhawk deck a couple, and it was doing well there as well, like surprisingly well. So those are both quite established decks, but those are some interesting tech choices some people have made to try and get an edge with something a little unpredictable.
Glazer's smiling.
I have that, those right? Decks. Those are the Valentina are both Sandrakhan and Derek decks. Yeah, like nice. I'm sitting cool. on one of those for tomorrow's video. It's literally got a thumbnail being made for it as we're speaking.
Or as we say from the future, yesterday's video. Or 2 days ago's video.
2 days ago's video, yeah.
It would be Thursday.
Tomorrow's they're pretty decent, I would say. Nothing busted, arguing.
The thumbnail might say busted. YouTube is not nice.
Scandal alert. Here we go.
It doesn't. It just says it's evil. I think I went with pure evil because it's a bunch of venomized stuff. All right. Okay.
I got one more question if I can ask it.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
All right, so surprise question. I'm sorry, Glenn, but I thought about this as we were talking. So, Misery came out recently, right? That's the 2-1 that basically reverse Hulkbuster. I've heard people talk about
Agony.
Oh, sorry, Agony. You're right. Agony came out. So I've heard people talk about, like, in trading card game realm, that's kind of like an uncommon, right? That's not the most spiciest card. Probably not something that you'd necessarily want to release to a spotlight because it might not, inspire players to pick it up as much. I imagine you have quite a few cards like that you might want to introduce into the game that just don't really hit as high. Are there more cards like that? And then, backed up on top of that is, the small alternate game variants or different ways to collect it other than the spotlight, a way to get cards that may just not fit into a spotlight into the game.
We are Agony is part of like exploring some space with, how can we maybe push in some cards that are much more support players, maybe not trying to garner like the level of attention or dedication that a Series 5 card might require. We don't have I mean, we've seen basically Agony. We do have, a new game mode coming soon, and maybe we'll see something similar there. That game's still in
I
development,
think
but
High
yeah, I
Voltage was
can't
such
reveal
a
a
home
lot more
run.
about our plans. But I really liked High Voltage. I think we learned a lot of good stuff from it. And one of those things certainly, like I am a card game designer. I like designing cards, and the more cards I can deliver to players, that's certainly a priority for me. And I think it's good for the company as well. I think it's a very
I think one of the home runs
approach.
I think one of the home runs that High Voltage hit is like people wanted this card, but it wasn't game breaking if you didn't get it. So it just I feel like players just weren't stressed over the new game mode if they weren't enjoying it. Whereas I think Cassandra Nova, like people knew that they really wanted that card, so I feel like there was a little bit more stress there to get it quickly, and I just feel like High Voltage was so much fun and unstressful. That's how I felt with the whole thing, which is so unstressful, fun to do. I continued playing it even after I got the cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I mean, I haven't looked at all of the data for it yet. We're still, sorting through a variety of things, but we're overall happy with high voltage. And I think the audience, the sentiment was pretty loudly positive, public. So yeah, I'm excited about it. It has given us on the design team, a lot more excitement and like quote unquote ammo to go at. Like what are some gameplay innovations that we can bring? Like what can we do to push on the space of Snap? Some of the particularly interesting things about that mode were, like the lack of a snap, the changing of the number of turns, the energy, like even banning cards, like those are all things that are really fundamentally breaking some of the stuff that we kind of imagined to be core to Snap. So it was really cool to see how well specifically those elements were received, because that opens up our toolkit for the kinds of things that we can do.
I bet. Well, thank you very much for answering my questions. I really appreciate it. It was awesome meeting you, Glenn. I know we met during the small creator tournament, but this is the first time I've actually got to chat with you. So thank you again, Roy, Glazer. Always awesome to chat with you too. This will be where I am making my exit.
So we will close the book on this segment, and then I will use some movie magic to transition us over into the next one. Right, friends, as we transition over to our next segment, I just wanted to remind our loyal listeners and loyal viewers, they are royal, our loyal listeners and loyal viewers, how to engage with us on social media. Our Twitter/X and Elon Musk's hell site is @SnapJudgeCast. We are incredibly grateful each and every week to be the official podcasting partner of Marvel Snap Zone, where awesome writers like our guest for this segment, Lauren, write and produce content. So grateful to be their official podcasting partner. Our email address is snapjudgmentspodcast@gmail.com if you want to send your message into the void that is our email. But most importantly, our where you're probably watching / listening to this right now is our YouTube, which is @SnapJudgmentsPod, where 6 of the 7 days a week, Aaron Glazer is out there pulsing out his daily Snap takes. Aaron, if our loyal listeners would become our loyal viewers, what would they find on the YouTube right now?
Decks that Glenn accidentally confirmed are good.
There we go. Decks Glenn accidentally confirmed are good will be up there on the YouTube for you to listen to. But that is enough of us sort of covering the transition here between Gunny to our awesome new special guest to join us here with Glenn, which is Lauren. Lauren, thank you for being on the show once again. We're always so happy to have you on.
Thank you. I'm always so happy to be on too.
Awesome.
Lauren doesn't need us anymore. She's got her own podcast that's better than this.
It's true. It was very enjoyable. It was very smooth when I uploaded that filler episode. It was great. Very easy on me, which is all I care about in life, is making things easier on me. All right. But again, loyal listeners, loyal viewers, or more likely first-time viewers, first-time listeners, you don't care about the awesome banter that we produce in the 99 or 98 other episodes. What you care about is Glenn. So, Glazer, begin this segment, my friend.
So I made a giant Series 4 and 5 tier list, buy list. It's based on basically not power level, but the current meta. And then I sent it to Glenn and was like, what'd I get wrong? Basically, that's the long and short of it, right? And so Glenn's gonna, if you're on YouTube, you can see this. I will send this to Roy and he can throw a link to it in the show notes. And then, Glenn's gonna tell us some of the things we messed up on. Mr. Jones.
Sure. So I'm assuming your kind of approach here is like objective strength of the cards, like that's the primary metric,
No, so
or
I'm running with power in current meta. I think
sure.
yeah, like
Okay.
yes,
I meant
yes,
that's what I meant, sorry, was like,
yeah,
you're trying to win the games. Like that's what the primary
yes.
metric of this is. Like you want to try and win games right now. All
Hmm.
right. Well, I think a lot of the chart I think lines up kind of roughly with what I think is reasonable. But I will say I think S tier is pretty far off, and most of the other
Ooh.
flaws kind of stem from there. And that's also depending on the level you're playing at, that can be in flux a little bit. But like of the cards on S tier, there are only two I'm like those are definitely S tier. I think, which are Darkhawk and Agent Venom. And the rest I think trickle down. I don't think any of them trickle down like lower than B, but I think there's some B's in there. And then from there, a lot of other stuff's like pretty good. Silver Sable and Scream, I think, are like two of the candidates that I think have like strong cases for S actually, based on their performance metrics. They're just both really strong cards. Scream is like kind of a Mr. Negative in a sense. So her on draw win rate's really high for her deck because when you have Scream, your deck's just dramatically stronger than when you don't. So that's a reason I think you kind of weigh her that way. And Darkhawk kind of has that going on, but it's less pronounced, but for similar reasons. And then the only other two that like really stood out loudly to me, Blob only goes like in Arsham, but his win rate is actually quite high. He is like last week at least he was in the top 5 win rates in the game, and he's been bouncing around there for a while, and mostly in Arsham, but that's what he's been doing. And then the last one that really jumped out to me was Meek, just very disrespectful. Meek actually was better than Hydra Bob last week on
Really?
cube rate. They had the same win rate, but he had a better cube rate.
Love to see it.
And both were good. I should clarify. It's not like Hydra Bob had a bad week. They're both good cards.
So, Glenn, before Glazer and Lauren do actual insightful commentary, I just want to say thank you, because I've been writing cards in various games with Aaron for almost a decade. And you, a professional game designer, calling out the bloat that he puts on S tier, it just made my heart grow so much there. Like I think it's great.
I think there's a reasonable case for like somewhere in the neighborhood of like 5 to 11 cards, depending on how you want to like draw the line. I just don't think you hit that many of them.
That's fine. Look.
Yeah.
I want to say something about Scream in particular. I was playing some Infinity Conquest with Sizer before, and we were playing against a move deck, and we realized that if they didn't have Scream on turn 4, we should immediately snap. Like no Scream on turn 4, and I was just like, "Oh, we're gonna win this." It doesn't matter what else they're doing. But like if they had Scream and we didn't have Luke, it was just like, "Oh, this is gonna be a problem." Scream is incredible when drawn.
Yeah. One of the things I haven't untangled from that deck specifically too much yet, because mostly it's just a fun deck and I don't really mind if it's strong. They're like Stegron and Craven and Silk and Kingpin all have pretty solid performance metrics, and I haven't taken the time to kind of weed through the data and pull them apart from Screen to measure which of them are best when drawn like with the another but not with Screen. Like if you have all 5 of these cards and then you pull out Scream, like is Kingpin Stegron good? Is Kingpin Silk good? Obviously there's no combo there, but like is it the tempo element of the deck? Like what is impacting it in that sense? So that's some analysis I have on my to-do list, is figuring out exactly like what all the clusters within that deck, which ones are really performant.
Cool. Lauren?
I wanted to call out Mr. Negative as being similar, which Glenn already did. I appreciate that call out because I just won an Infinity Conquest today. And part of the reason I did is because I was snapping on Negative whenever he didn't have Ravonna or Psylocke on too. It's like, that's how you have to do it. You have to push that like aggressively when they have such a swingy, polarizing power.
What cards that aren't 2 cards, not like 50? What cards that aren't in S tier do you think would make it?
I mean, I already had said Scream, but I'll pick a different one. Interestingly, right now, I think Hitmonkey.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a handful of like Arsham cards that just have a pretty high win rate, like Blob. And part of that is owing to like Arsham has as a deck kind of a suppressed win rate because you don't draw some of your cards as often. So like
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they're very strong when you do draw them makes sense, right? So like I'm not gonna like technically you could make a case for Agent Coulson, but I'm not going to. That's silly. But he is the best Arsham card. Like right on just pure win rate, his numbers were the best in the last week was Agent Coulson, which was funny. So I guess Cassandra Nova, by virtue of being really strong against Arsham, also has quite a solid performance. I think she is credible to be up there.
Did I throw her in B? I probably threw her in B.
You did throw her in B.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
She's staring at me right now.
It's a really close mix, though. To be honest, like after the top like 5 cards, there's like a run of cards that are in all like kind of within a percentage of each other in win rate. So you're kind of slicing very thinly at that point.
Fair. Any further questions on this, or are we ready for the next section?
Let's do it.
I'm ready.
All right. Lauren and I spent, I don't know, an hour or so? 2 hours? Something in that general area last night, 2 nights before. Time, again, has lost meaning. Basically going over the top 5 in each cost slot so that Glenn could react. And these weren't necessarily, like, they're in no order, and these weren't necessarily, like, there were a few we chose just because we thought they'd make for interesting conversation points instead of necessarily guaranteeing them being wrong. So, Glenn, actually, Lauren, would you mind reading our top 5 ones?
Yeah, it's Nico, Minoru, The Hood, Silver Sable, Kitty Pryde, and Ghost Spider, because Glazer insisted on move rep.
I just wanted to talk about move, and this was like one of the 2 places I got a chance to.
Yeah, your whole list actually, that was one thing that was funny to me was you actually I think decently respect move in some of these lists, but I think you picked the wrong cards a couple of most of the time actually. I think as far as like which ones were the best at which thing. So yeah, like actually Ghost Spider is the worst performing card on this list, which is kind of interesting right now. Yeah, she's interesting. To be fair, it was just a rough week for her, I guess. She's had good weeks, but last week wasn't very good.
How about Aranya? Because
yeah, I think
that was the decision between Ghost Spider and Aranya. Like, which one do we include?
Yeah, I think Aranya is doing better, and so Ghost Spider's play rate, most of Ghost Spider's play, I think, has been in like the really dedicated move decks, which are a bit more vulnerable, or Phoenix, which are a bit more vulnerable, and so that's taken some of the numbers she was getting by virtue of just being in one of the better decks. So once she starts getting replaced, that kind of damages her average. But they're different cards, but roughly equivalent. I just think that recently there's been a favorite in a different direction. And this has actually been kind of a tough week for Nico Minoru. I think she might be at like her all-time low, which isn't particularly bad, but yeah, she's ranged from like, roughly a coin flip to being like one of the best cards in the game at various points. So right now she's kind of on a sitting a little lower. As far as like cards you missed, Korg is actually like just really crushing it right now. It's not a fancy, not exciting, but Korg. He's doing his thing. Meek and Hydra Bob both solid, like we mentioned those already.
Every time you say Meek, Roy glows.
Yeah, well, because Glazer just will never admit that card is good, so it's great every time you do.
I run it in my solid, discard list. Okay, so theory, and you can confirm, deny, or say, I don't know, I didn't look into that, whatever. I think from my experience, from what I've seen, cards like Ghost Spider and Nico, like Nico in particular, when it's played in bounce, do way better at high infinite than in the rest of the slice of the meta. Like,
I think that tends to hold. Like, yeah, Nico especially, I think, is a tricky card for people to play. You have to kind of know when it's correct to just like try and get 4 power out of this card, or try and like maximize the draw 2 or whatever. Yeah,
makes sense. Whenever I share a bounce list, it's like 65% win rate high infinite. Then people play it, and it's like 48% win rate. Like, oh well, there's a disconnect here. Okay.
Oh yeah,
it's the same with move too, right? We wanted to represent move, but it's way better at in skilled hands.
The 6 people who could play it.
I guess it has a very high skill floor.
Sorry, Lauren. I guess that the only card we haven't really mentioned is Silver Sable. So, Glenn, any thoughts about this card?
Yeah. That one's just very good. You just got that one right.
Woohoo!
Yeah, I think it's I believe it is the best performing 1-cost card in the game right now.
Ooh, pretty cool.
The first time I wrote about Sable, I was like, "This is trash," and then someone said, "Bounce it," and I went, "This is amazing." It was the entire logic of that card.
Yeah, it's a card.
It seems decent outside bounce too, but
it's pretty decent outside bounce in my experience.
Yes, but when it's a 1/9 though, right?
You're right.
All right. Top 5 twos, Lauren.
Agent Venom, Kate Bishop, Madam Web, Fina, and Shadow King.
Yeah, I think these are all pretty reasonable choices. You didn't hit the top 5 exactly, but I think they're all fairly credible. I think Madam Web's the only one that you're maybe overrating a bit. But the rest are all if you swap Madam Web for Scream, I think it's a pretty straightforward, good looking list. Or US Agent, another fine option.
I fought for US Agent.
You fought for Invisible
Woman. He's having a good week. He's having a very good week.
Invisible Woman. There you go, Lauren. That's spicy as heck.
In this meta specifically, counters
Invisible Woman's also quite good. Yeah.
Cerebro 3 meta incoming. All right. Agent Venom is S tier, right? Did you?
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask about nerfing because who cares, right? You're not going to answer that. That's a waste of everyone's time. Did you expect it to be this strong?
I mean, we certainly expected it to be a tier 1 strategy. We try and target all of our season pass cards to appear in tier 1 strategies. We want them to be exciting and rewarding and fun, and for people to feel really good about what they're able to do with it. We have been impressed with the range of cards people we were Speed is a good example of one where we were Speed's okay, but Speed's actually been really good in Agent Venom decks. He wasn't one of our strongest internal cards in those decks, but he's been very strong in those decks specifically, which are very cool.
So for me, Glenn, Kate Bishop. So it's been a little bit of time since she's been out. Where do you sort of where did she land for second dinner? Are you all overall happy with her? I think she's that's sort of my thought, because Kate Bishop is probably my favorite card that's been released in this part of the year. I guess you could say late fall or late summer, early fall. So what do you think about Kate?
I love Kate Bishop. She was a really fun card to design as well. You may not know, but the Young Avengers season is actually the first season since I was hired, or I guess since whatever season was after Guardians of the Galaxy, I don't remember. That was the first season that I was, put basically the kind of solo season lead for Snap. And Young Avengers is the first season where someone else took that lead, which was Jason Yang, one of our more junior designers. So it's his first go, and working with him on that set and kind of it was almost kind of teaching a craft with a card like Kate Bishop, because there's a lot of specific ways you want to approach it, how many arrows, what kind of effects should they have, should they all be equal, should some of them should one or two be much better, one be worse, why is that good, why is that important, what cost should a card like this be, etc., etc. So there are lots of opportunities to kind of explore the theory of why you design in certain ways, and Kate Bishop was a fun card to design in that sense. And also, awesome. we're happy with it. It's it was a very fun card to see released into the metagame. I think it went in a lot of fun decks and felt like a great season pass. I don't think anyone walked away too unhappy with Kate Bishop as their season pass card.
You made me very nervous, Surtur, with your explanation of your goals for season pass cards. Just so you know, oh no, Scar, so much Scar. All right.
I mean, it's definitely not going to make Scar worse. I'll say that.
Yeah. Oh dear. Okay. Lauren, 3s?
You ready? Top 5 threes. Silver Surfer, Cosmo, Cassandra Nova, Copycat, and Hitmonkey.
Yeah, I think this is largely a really defensible list. I mean, like I mentioned, Agent Coulson is theoretically a contender here, but just is kind of emblematic of a different thing than his actual strength, so I don't really consider that true. I did call it speed. I think speed is performing better than some of these cards right now. Copycat's probably the one I imagine I would knock off for speed if I was editing, if I were to edit. I don't think there necessarily should be knocking anybody off. I think Silver Surfer's a solid card. Cosmo's doing well. But I did, in reviewing some of this data myself, actually, Polaris and Spider-Man are both cards that are having like a little bit of a heyday right now. So that was really cool to just see in the data, because I always think when those kinds of cards are good, I think that's generally a healthy indicator.
Ben Roller's going to be so happy to hear that.
Yeah, Ben Roller just did a backflip.
Those are like his 2 favorite cards.
So how's Surfer Scream? How are Surfer Scream decks? Are they performing as well as regular Scream, or are they like a different slice?
The Surfer Scream decks, I don't think that their numbers cluster them up to are like unique enough to cluster apart from Surfer. I think it kind of gets subsumed by that data unless I dive a little bit deeper, and I haven't had cause to kind of pull those apart, since there's nothing that indicates like Surfer's like a problem right now, and so I don't really need to figure out, and it certainly isn't too weak, so haven't had cause to go in and tear it apart and figure out which part I should pull in which direction.
Fair. And one more question: how do you feel about like a really old tech card like Cosmo suddenly being all over the place?
Love it. I mean, that's when we talk about like release valves. Like, this is the exact kind of function that we expect them to have and want them to have. Cosmo in particular is a card that's tricky because it feels like Cosmo really wants like an extra half a power, but we don't have that value, so that's not something we can really do. And there's a little bit like overbuffing Cosmo certainly has like a really dramatic impact on the new user experience, where it's a card that can be like really frustrating for some of the most exciting new user decks. So we've kind of had some metagames for Cosmo. We were like, we wish people would play Cosmo more, but it doesn't seem like Cosmo's quite strong enough. But this one, fortunately, that has not been the case. Like, Cosmo's been excellent.
Fair. All right. Any further 3 thoughts? Nope. 4s. Let's see. This, I bet you I got this one entirely. We got this one entirely wrong.
This was your worst category.
Yeah, 4s are hard.
That's true.
Lauren?
Okay, you ready for it? Wiccan, Shang-Chi, Gwenpool, Misery, and Man-Thing. Yeah, we had a really long list before we whittled this down to 5.
The only one we liked Gwenpool, Misery, and Wiccan.
Yeah, Gwenpool's definitely up there, and to be honest, like these are definitely in that group of like there's a percentage or two separating some of these from like better ones, and if we wait 4 days or whatever, the list could totally change who's in what order. I think they're that tight and close together. So yeah, but Gwenpool's definitely quite good. The ones that you might be, I guess, a little surprised by. Even I was surprised, actually. Rock Slide post the change to 4 has still been quite good, quite performant.
Classic.
Typhoid Mary's buff has been good. The current Zabu Scar deck that some people are playing was a deck I was excited to see emerge from that change.
Stop scaring me about Surtur.
And Miles Morales actually was another one that's stood out. Doesn't really count as a 4, but yeah, Miles has been having a good time.
I don't even know what to say. I'm so surprised Miles is so good. Every time he's played against me, I'm like, that is such a big damn swing.
Yeah, I think that's part of that. What makes that Scream deck really interesting is it can play kind of like the Angel Athena type decks, where it's just like I'm just really efficiently deploying a lot of power, and then it also has these draws where it's like, now I'm actually just really screwing with you, and it's not about overpowering anything. Like, it's like, okay, well, that's actually kind of reminiscent of like the Angela, the Little Movers decks, where except it's like I'm moving your stuff instead of I'm moving my stuff, basically.
A community opinion, and you can confirm, deny, or just pass on this, I guess, is the community consensus is that 3-5 is the breakpoint for where a 3 is just like generically good and worth playing, whereas a 3-4, it has to be doing something sort of exceptional to make a deck. And again, you can confirm or deny this part too. I'm coming more and more to think that 4.6 and 4.7 is that break point. Where like if it's 4.7, it's just like the stats are so good that it might just be worth running any damn way, as long as it gives you something good.
Yeah, I think that that's roughly correct. I know I got asked a Discord question a while ago about the vanilla curve, and I think the vanilla curve of a game. One of the things actually people really often misconstrue that the vanilla curve is they think that it's the median value, but it's not. Like the vanilla should be like the worst cards in your game. Like you don't want anyone looking at Misty Knight and some card that they just opened and thinking, actually, this Misty's looking pretty great, right? Like that's occasionally fine, but you really want everything to be pushing them towards the new content. So it is a baseline, but it's the bottom, not the middle. So like when we make a card strictly better than Cyclops, it's like, yeah, that's just most cards should be strictly better than Cyclops.
I mean, I was thinking more like the difference in how Nocturne has felt as a 3/4 versus like if Copycat was a 3/4, I feel like that's a card I never look at. But as a 3/5, I feel like it has a lot of value.
Yeah, that's a line. 1 power means a lot at 2 and 3, especially, which makes sense, right? Because 2 and 3 is where you're converting the least energy into the most percentage gain on power, right? Like a 2/2 becoming a 2/3 is now 150% of the previous power, right? And it's funny because like 1 costs you would think would be more dramatic in those shifts, but because we have pressures like Killmonger, the gains are sometimes smaller, and you wind up needing to push a lot more power into 1 costs if all they're giving you is power. Like, Hawkeye and Rocket Raccoon or whatever are good examples of like it takes a lot to get those cards into decks. Agent Venom is what it takes, it turns out.
Oh, yeah. Well, when they're 1/8s, all of a sudden, or 1/9s, the math has changed.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. 4 thoughts?
I think 4s are. This is when the 4, 5s, and 6. I don't envy this about the design team. Is that it's so hard to make the higher cost cards be. I don't know, like you want them to be like setup cards, or like if they're early on the side of a combo, they're setting up a combo. It's so hard to convince a player to do a high cost setup like that. And obviously it's possible. We have like Sarah in the game, right? Or and we see this with activate cards too, where it's just like it's really hard to play a card late. And I think like Anti-Venom's a good example of that we're seeing this week. And I just like I think that's a fun challenge about looking at 4s and why 4s probably have been a challenging with and without Zabu to figure out where that right balance is on them. Just like how do you make something that's playable but right in the middle of the energy curve?
I tend to think of 4s and 5s in mostly 2 ways. Like either they're kind of like the thing that you're doing, and maybe we cost them lower so that they can be played with other cards on the last turn. Gilgamesh is like a good example of that, right? Where he's the thing that the deck is doing. Or they're kind of emblematic of the extra pass. Like it's MODOK maybe is kind of in that vein where it's like MODOK, you're not like losing to the MODOK, but MODOK's definitely like, all right, there's one more swing about to come. Like this is the thing. And I think that's roughly the right approach. Certainly, like that's one of the weaknesses of a card like White Queen, right? Like White Queen's not doing either of those things. She's not slamming the door on anybody, and she's also not making the extra pass because you probably have a better high cost card for your own deck in your deck than your opponent did. So like even though that's a really appealing and fun design to play with, I think like I'm sure we all remember like Series 1, White Queen's a really fun card. But you just eventually leave it behind, and it's tough to justify cards like that as your collection gets bigger, as your decks get more refined.
Yeah, totally.
So Wiccan, how is Second Dinner feeling about this card? This is a card that I have mixed feelings about. Like my play experiences with Wiccan have been all over the place. Sort of where have you all landed? How are you feeling about Wiccan? Sort of any insights to sort of the secret sauce that Second Dinner has?
I think I lost connection because all of you froze at the same time.
Around the dark for.
All right, all of you froze for a minute. I think my internet blipped, but we're back. I did hear you ask about Wiccan. We're happy with Wiccan. One of our goals, we had lofty, or maybe lofty is the wrong word, but I would say like a lot of goals kind of for Wiccan. Very early in design, we really wanted like Wiccan and Speed to have synergy, their siblings. And we even at one point were trying to tie in Emperor Hulkling, who is Wiccan's romantic partner. But ultimately we decided, that was too much to try and do with 3 cards, which generally is true. Even 2 cards is really a lot. Horus Glaive and Proxima Midnight, another good example of that, where it like was fine but didn't quite land heavy. But Wiccan and Speed, fortunately, were like worked out okay. I mean, a lot of our goals with Wiccan were basically like, can we get people to play with Quicksilver and or Domino, and if we wanted them to do that, like what does that look like? And I think we landed that pretty nicely, because I think the way it's turned out is like you can do either of those, but you also don't have to. And it doesn't really matter which thing is strongest, but because they're all like in an acceptable range. But it's also just really exciting card to read and imagine. Like as far as like the setup cards go, like he's a rare 4, I think, that kind of sets you up to do a lot of stuff.
He's a really fun deck building challenge too.
Very
How do you
much so.
optimize the curve so that we're gonna get to use our Wiccan sometimes, but then when you have all that energy, actually be able to do something with it? Super interesting.
Yeah, I remember playing like just putting Kitty Pryde in decks that weren't like especially good Kitty Pryde decks, but just because it problem solved so many of my Wiccan draws.
Yeah, she totally does.
You're muted, Aaron.
Return Maria Hill to relevance too.
Yeah.
We're all
They
just
were
waiting.
both in the deck that I just took to a beautiful Infinity avatar.
Which Valkyrie avatar is it this time?
It's the Nightmare Momoko Captain Marvel.
Nice.
We're all also
something spooky.
We're all also in the Joe Locke variant waiting room for Wicked, so
I'll let our art director know.
All right, I think it's time to talk about the 5s, which for me is the cost slot that I think is like the most awkward in the game. So I'm super interested to sort of see Glenn's thoughts on these cards. So go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, they're like super 4s. Sarah, Iron Man, Darkhawk, Claw, Ajax.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty good list. You can make cases for various things. I mentioned Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is actually pretty good, doing quite well. Whenever we're in a metagame where like overwhelming somebody tends to be the thing, you kind of see that tide where it's like, these decks that just ignore you and try and put out points tend to rise up, and then Sarah or whatever rises up in response to that, and that kind of creates this cyclical churn. I think we're right at that Sarah emergence has basically like just happened, so the tail on a deck like Gilgamesh is kind of waning, but he was still pretty good for the last week. A card that might surprise that is actually performing really well right now is Arrow. Yeah. But otherwise, these are all great options. I mean, they're all in top decks, all performing really well. Don't feel inclined to knock any of them from their perch, so to say.
Awesome.
Do you have any sense if that Arrow strength is that only coming in a move deck, or is it coming in other places?
It is mostly in the move deck, but it actually is. Arrow's also performing in the Scar deck as like a tech option for there, because like you get to relocate their power into a lane that's really not good for them.
Yeah, I think she's a cool card that we've just slept on since she got changed.
Well, she went from like a million years ago, like the best card in the game, right? So it's just it hurts.
It was really funny to me, because it was one of the most early buffs we made, was like taking Arrow from 5/6 to 5/8, and it was funny because I remember talking about it because I felt like I think Arrow is broken and nobody has noticed, and we're just gonna make her a 5/8. Like, and then it was like, yeah, no, that's cracked.
Yeah, all of a sudden,
gotta help the people notice.
Yeah,
you'll never convince me that's not what you did with Daredevil. Like
Shadow King.
Shadow King's obvious, right? Like Daredevil was starting to show up in decks, and every time I tried it, it was just like eating the meta alive. And then all of a sudden it got buffed, and I was like, wait, what just happened? Like,
Daredevil's just a cool card. I just thought I could use it.
Very cool.
Very cool card.
We did debate 1-2 actually on Daredevil quite a bit. Because I did really enjoy the idea of Electra killing Daredevil. That seems like pretty hysterical.
That is very thematic.
I like Daredevil as a 2/3 a lot. Please don't let him be killed. I'm running Daredevil in so many decks right now. Okay. Other thought. I think Ajax is, and then we can move on to 6s. I think Ajax is just a home run. Like that deck, the sort of Affliction stuff was so like pocket case, never really there, and then all of a sudden Ajax, and like there's packages now, there's decks, and it's so cool. I love Ajax. That's it. I don't have any constructive question there. I like Ajax. All right. 6s.
Magneto, Eliath, Arishem. 6. Heimdall, Mockingbird.
Yeah, this one's tricky because the metagame right now is not, I would say, especially friendly to 6s. So, like, even if these aren't the best ones, it's not like there's, many contending. Like, I think actually Hulkling's, like, not that much worse than Magneto on win rate right now, and it's not because either are doing super well. Like, that's Magneto is doing the best, I think, of the 6s probably after Blob, maybe. But yeah, like other than that, it's just mostly the cost reducers, which kind of feel like they don't count. But yeah, like Scar and Sasquatch and Mockingbird are all doing pretty well. And then it's the true 6s are having not a super great time, which we actually see fairly consistently is the case when the metagame is really heavy with bounce. That is specifically something that bounce decks tend to be like really good against anybody trying to play a 6-cost card.
How's Infinite?
Not especially great. Like in that muddled mix of 6s, it goes in some narrowish decks. I do think some of those decks are really cool. I was actually playing a deck I enjoyed quite a bit with Black Swan and She-Hulk, Sasquatch, Pixie, Scar, and was kind of, I think I called it Scarly's Angels was my deck name for that one.
Oh yeah,
it was really,
I had that.
Really fun deck. Yeah,
had that deck saved somewhere. Yeah.
All the discounts.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about Eliath. Is Eliath doing okay? I feel like he actually can handle a bounce deck.
The high voltage was a real renaissance, I would say, for Eliath. But yeah, he is fine. I think the surge in things like Rocket Raccoon and whatnot have been not great for Eliath because when they come back down, they just still have enough power to be fairly threatening even when they're not hitting the triggers. Like previous bounce before Ancient Venom was able to justify including those cards, it's like, the Demon was pretty big, but it wasn't like the Iceman Spider-Ham crew was gonna take anybody to town. It was all about like Hitmonkey and can you put these two demons in some good places, basically was how a lot of the games came down. But now with Ancient Venom, you're not nearly as reliant on those particular cheap plays, and you have a variety of ways to distribute pretty competitive power for a 6/10.
This card
That's
is
just
not
one
a
layman's
6.
opinion.
Well, what do you
just think? A layman?
I would be remiss if I didn't ask this. How have both Activate as a new mechanic and Black Swan landed?
Black Swan's actually doing quite well right now. I think a lot of that's just the kind of deck we were just talking about with Ancient Venom, yeah. But I'm happy with the change because it did just wind up missing. It was a complicated card to test. And yeah, I'm not sure. We felt pretty strongly that 2/3 on reveal was not right. Just on as I was just saying, having cards with bodies is really important to bounce to kind of justify that extra power. And I don't know, maybe we could have gotten away with 2/4. That feels pretty sketchy for an on reveal version of the card. But I'm pretty happy with the Activate one. I think it plays well and is fun and creates the right fantasy for what you're trying to do with set up a handful of ones. That part of the gameplay is compelling. As far as Activate itself goes, we mostly have confirmed a lot of our hypotheses about the mechanic. We were a little too conservative, I think, with it. I know with Symbiote Spider-Man, we actually started him at 3 cost, and our playtesting team really early on kind of identified Symbiote Spider-Man Shuri as being this like incredibly potent thing to do when he was at 3 cost.
Yeah.
And it was like, all right, well, are we going to like nerf Shuri in order to justify making this 3 cost card? And also like this new mechanic that we're not going to, be able to test all the corners. Like, well, we caught Shuri, we'll probably miss something else because that's just the nature of like doing something new. So we wound up deciding to try and balance at 4 and reduce the risk we had found. And I think it wound up just being a little too much, and maybe the design itself really just does need to live at a lower cost or with some additional help in some way to kind of give it some move. We had a lot of different symbiote Spider-Mans though. Like he was pulling from the hand, he was doing all kinds of stuff. And the one we landed on, I think, has like a pretty fun pattern. But yeah, I think a couple of our activate cards missed a little low. Scarlet Spider is one that was like really tricky because I don't think we have like a full power to give there because that's just like quite strong and risky to do. Maybe in hindsight or a few months from now we'll be like, all right, actually 4/6 is fine or for whatever reason. But I think that's one of the tricks with Activate specifically was we wanted to give it a solid debut and show off a lot of cards with it, but in doing that really overstresses our ability to forecast and playtest. I had the same thing happen when I worked on Magic very early on. One of the first sets I worked on was Kaladesh, which debuted a mechanic called the vehicle card type. And for a lot of that time, like how vehicles even worked was constantly changing. And so like by the time the functionality got locked down, it was like actually aiming them to be balanced and competitive was really difficult. So they wound up missing pretty high or low in general. And that's just a big risk with that mechanic.
People keep asking, and it came to mind while you're talking about Symbiote Spider-Man. Are you going to continue to push like different variants of the same card? Like Symbiote Spider-Man is still Peter Parker, like as separate cards. Like might we one day see an Old Man Logan or something similar?
Well, before I answer, like, do you guys like that?
I personally do. I know some people have complained that their Symbiote Spider-Man card is no longer the the McFarlane art. But I personally like it. I don't know what others think. Lauren?
I like it too, and I would also like the I don't know how to explain it. Like if there were, multiple characters who use the same mantle, separating them into different cards. I'm down with that too. There's like 2 or 3 wasps. There's a couple, we could do Scott Lang and Hank
Ghost Rider.
Pym. Yeah. I'd be down for that too. I think that that's important to draw people to the game with characters that they love, right? So many of them are in series 1 and 2. So I think using beloved characters to, sell cards, keep the game exciting, I think that's worth doing.
I also like it, except I would have moved the McFarlane art to Symbiote Spider-Man. I'd say if you own this variant, it is now a Symbiote Spider-Man variant. Like
it's easy to say that when you don't have to reply to the Discord users.
I agree. It's easy for me to say. Like this is super easy for me to say. I'm not paid, but like it annoys me. Like when someone plays Spider-Man and it's initially the McFarlane variant, I'm like, wait, is that Symbiote Spider-Man? And then it starts moving. I'm like, oh, there's like this this moment of like disconnect. That's sort of my.
Isn't there a Ben Reilly one too?
There is.
Ben Reilly Spider-Man?
Yeah, there is. So like that is my only concern. I think that probably won't be a problem for you guys going forward. Now that you have this space to think about, you might save. If we're gonna do Old Man Logan, let's not do any Old Man Logan Wolverine variants, right? Although I don't think you all have done one yet.
But I could be wrong.
There's one. But
90% sure.
So you might save that space, but
I'm optimistic about continuing to pursue it. I think it's fun and exciting. One of the things, like obviously Magic repeats characters a lot, and there's a strength in being able to tell the story of a character across multiple incarnations. It's just very compelling. That's core to comic books as well. Like there's Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, Superior Spider-Man. There's like all of these different Spider-Mans. And they're all, well, I guess technically Superior is not Peter Parker, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. So yeah, I think it is compelling and good, and early snap, like some of the decisions weren't made till necessarily around like we don't know the future or what's going to turn out to be a good idea or what's going to turn out to be a bad idea. So I think it was very reasonable to release some of those variants. But yeah, I totally get that it's a little bit on the awkward side. But I think that the rule of cool wins out on this one for me, where it's just like, yeah, it's super awesome to get Spider-Man again. Like, we all enjoyed getting our first Spider-Man. Like, getting him again is really fun. Whether we approach it this way, like, this was definitely kind of a first testing of the waters, because there's like a really clear, like, costume change. Like, this one's not so bad. Like, doing like Nomad for Steve Rogers or Ronin for Hawkeye or stuff like that is a lot easier than just like Cap again. Like, that's a totally different kind of thing. So that's a different story, I guess, to like how and if we ever cross that kind of a bridge. But I do think it's really, really compelling. And shout out Lorcana is another game I think has done a really good job with repeating characters, and they've made it a really excellent core part of their game and showcased that strength. Yeah, and to Snap's credit, like, they did it. Jane Foster, was a really early case where that was pretty much the same thing in Miles Morales as well. So I think this is really just kind of an expansion of that idea, and learning that actually we want to maybe hit that note harder and more often than we might have guessed we did really early on.
You heard it here first, folks. What if season coming soon?
We already got the Exiles season, right? So you never know.
Yeah. We did get an Exiles.
I do love Exiles.
Like, I love the like lesser known Marvel property stuff. Like, you saying the word Prodigy, I was like, please, 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 immediately Prodigy card.
Hey, again, people are really loving that new NYX series, so
I need to read it. I didn't even realize it existed.
Yep. All right. So
all right, we're gonna go through
Glazer.
5 decks. You tell us, is this actually really, like, not these exact 12, who cares about the exact 12? You tell us, are these really good? Are these not? These are supposed to be the top 5 decks. And then you tell us, beyond the Scream deck, is there anything that we just totally... Oh, no, we have a Scream deck in here, right?
Yeah, you got the Scream deck.
Yeah, is there anything we totally whiffed on? So, Sarah Miracle, this is the basic Sarah Miracle that runs. It should probably be running Gwenpool. Most of the Think versions do. But the Hitmonkey is Sarah Miracle deck. How's it doing?
It's a good deck. It is one of, I think, the better decks, yeah. Cool. We have right now roughly, I don't know, like 5 or 6 decks that I think are like a little bit separated from the herd, and then like a pack of 10 that are like kind of even, and then some other stuff below that. So yeah, it's in that top camp.
Cool. Let us go to... This should say Bounce. I just don't know how to type. Bounce. I'm assuming Bounce is doing really well.
Bounce is
this whole conversation.
Bounce is doing pretty well. The werewolf version specifically, I don't know, like, that element. But in general, yeah, like, Bounce is a solid deck right now.
I don't like the werewolf version. This is just the most recent version I had built since since this slideshow was made. I think werewolf is probably wrong, but Barzy yelled at me, so whatever. Barzy doesn't yell. That is not correct.
I do love werewolf, so you won't catch me, and it's on theme for the month, so yeah.
Werewolf and Hitmonkey, I think, are made like, and Beast. So apparently I like the animalistic cards. But yeah, that just all happened to go on one deck. Feel free to chime in with any thoughts or questions about any of the decks, please, friends. All right.
You do have my favorite toxin.
Yeah, me too. By a lot. Although I try to have one variant for every card. That is my content creator.
But there
I get to do stuff goal.
I love that Glazer says he likes what's a variant for each card. But there's not about this one.
Share a variant for every card in every single deck I'm ever going to share, right? Have a variant for every single card in the game. This is not my game. This is from Snapzone.
It's from Pulse Glazer and Snapzone too.
I have a variant for every card that has more than a Spotlight variant, and like 3/4 of the ones that do. There's like Valentina, I'm still missing, and a couple others. All right. This, I don't know what to call this. Agent Venom, the Woody deck. Agent Venom, Iron Man Claw, that's everywhere. Is this deck as good as it seems?
I think it's pretty good. I'm admittedly a Woody fan. He tends to make decks that I think in particular are really cool and fun. So I'm biased in that regard. But yeah, I mean, it's, leveraging a lot of strong cards. And obviously the Mystique element, I think, is like the biggest true unique part of it, is offering this kind of like extra potential, very strong thing to wind up being able to do. I think this is, as variations in the go, like, I think this deck is like one of the harder to play. So like, I haven't sliced it apart by groupings, but like, one of the things I've definitely tended to notice, like whenever you have a deck with like Cosmo and a bunch of on reveals, is like it gets pretty. Those decks tend to split off because it requires you to really know what you're doing as to where everything needs to be from pretty early on.
That makes perfect sense. All right. This, I assume, is the one that does not make your metrics. This is the Wiccan Ajax list. The current number 3 player has been playing the crap out of this.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think this deck is fine. I don't think it's as good as at least the Bounce and Sarah Miracle deck probably, but and like I said, the Woody deck, it's hard for me to like know exactly where that deck's landing on the metrics. So I think it's probably the worse than those 3 decks would be my guess, but definitely respectable. And I know there's I think my manager actually has been enjoying some variation on this deck that was playing. I can't remember what was changed, but I know they were really enjoying it.
If I had to guess, it would be Killmonger.
That might have been it.
A lot of the newer versions are running Killmonger because bounces everywhere, and then you stick that behind Invisible Woman. Yeah, I don't play a lot of Wiccan, but Wiccan keeps winning like the little tournaments people run, and the number 3 players playing it. So I just assume there's something there that I'm not seeing, that I don't have the patience to snap and retreat with properly.
I think my guess, and this is more theoretical than anything else, really, is it tends to be that when you have a lot of players with like really similar skill levels, it tends to be the strategies that optimize for leveraging variance tend to do really well. You actually see this in poker, where like a lot of the optimization and game theory is around like being able to make big bluffs in spots or draw to very strong hands that those bluffs are then disguising so that you can maximize your profits. So sometimes you're like actively just trying to flip a coin with somebody because they're just as good as you, and that's like the best you're going to get is flipping a coin a lot of the time. So I think that's what leads to some things like this, and Wiccan's a good example of that, right? Where like Wiccan's definitely feels like flipping a coin sometimes.
Totally reasonable. Last deck, Scream Move. We've talked about this all video. This is apparently doing phenomenally.
Yeah, it's doing better than I had expected upon release. Pretty happy with it overall.
I mean, and it got better, right? Like it's the +1 power. It really matters.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we needed to do that, but I didn't mind. It was an unusual situation where we realized we'd just left a bugged interaction in, and we like to make sure that we're not disadvantaging people when we necessarily make something that it's like, oh well, we should have caught that and made sure that people were making really informed card acquisition decisions. So in order to make sure that nobody's feeling sad, we'll ensure that Scream is hitting exactly where we want. And it has wound up. It might be another case where it's like, yeah, I wish that card had like half less power or something. But I think it's a fun deck. It's one of the kinds of decks that it's fairly fun to be strong as long as it's not taking away too much agency from your opponent as far as where their cards get to be.
Fair. What is one deck we forgot that would obviously replace the Wiccan deck?
I mean, I think these decks are like definitely. I don't think that deck's like really much worse than these decks. But the we mentioned earlier, like the Zabu Scar deck has shown up somewhat recently with Typhoid Mary. It's doing pretty well. It has a surprisingly high cube rate, if I recall, but that also might be part of it just being a little novel right now and people not really expecting what can happen to them sometimes on turn 6. And so since the list is not very flexible, I imagine people will start to get used to being like, oh, that deck has Shadow King in it. Okay, good to know. Like that kind of thing. And Darkhawk still cannot get rid of it. Darkhawk is inevitable.
I don't know if there's a way to look into this. How much of the power of Darkhawk is taking away opponent draws versus the power of Darkhawk himself?
I think a lot of it, especially I think like one of the places Darkhawk's most successful tends to be at higher MMR. And it's similar to Wiccan in that way, in that you're trying to get this edge where it's like, well, if they just draw 2 of these rocks, I'm a lot more likely to win.
That makes perfect sense. Any follow-ups?
That's one of the things that Scream and Darkhawk both have, right? They get to disrupt and do their power building thing at the same time. It's pretty cool. Although I'll say I feel much better playing against Darkhawk than Scream. That's just me.
I'm terrible against Scream. I don't know what I'm doing. Like so much of the muscle, like skill building of Marvel Snap is, at least for me, is like I've got like 3 turns planned in advance. Like I'm playing this here for this reason, and then it's over there and not then -2 power. I'm like, but now my brain needs to replan 18 times, and the mental load like overwhelms me. Not in a bad way. I don't, like that's not like a change it, but like it's just it rocks me. I've got like a terrible win rate against it.
Well, it's a good testament to the importance of like balancing around diversity and having thresholds. You know, like we probably don't want Scream to be more popular than like Zoo for like a long amount of time, right? Like because Zoo is just like dramatically easier to play with and against. So like if Scream's growing to become like this huge chunk of the metagame, it's like, oh, we probably want to try and like get the relative strength of those decks back in line.
That makes
but
sense.
That's not something we're worried about right now. Just happy to kind of see where things go.
Darn it. I was soft hoping you were confirming a Marvel Boy getting his power back, but they'll have to live to ride another day. Anything else about this deck before we move into our final segment of this fine evening? All right, cool. Variant of the week. We do this every week. Normally there are 3 variants, but today there are only 2. We have the hip variant. Who picked the hip variant for this one?
Everyone but you, including Gunny.
Oh, wow. Everyone but me. Wow. Well, it's a great variant. So do folks. Glenn, you are our very special guest. So what do you like about this hip Howard the Duck?
I'm generally just a Dan Hip fan. Really like a lot of his pieces. Very unique style. I generally think a lot of his pieces have in common is like a really strong sense of space. Like the composition is always like really feels like it has a lot of depth to it, which is tricky to do with such a cartoonish style. And they're very colorful. So those are the 2 things that really stand out to me with a lot of his pieces. And I think Howard in particular certainly exemplifies that.
Lauren?
I mean, I would have said this. I would have said the same thing about the color. I don't know what it is about. Like, I love hip in general. I don't know what it is about this one, but it's the best Howard, and it's up there among the best hips too. It's got a great pose, very dynamic, very. I love his face. Everything about it is just fantastic.
Glazer?
Hips don't lie.
So this one is technically trying to find the name. That's why I'm scrolling up to what I messaged Aaron Galloway. That's Ryan Galloway, right? That's the artist of the one that I picked. I really love the hip too, but I wanted to do something different than what Aaron did. The thing I like about the Galloway is like it strikes the right balance between like cartoony, but not like unbelievably cartoony with Howard, and not like photorealistic Howard, like the George Lucas Howard the Duck movie Howard. So I think it strikes the like right level of like where I think the character should land, which is like a believable character that could stand next to Spider-Man, stand next to Captain America, but not so realistic that again you're in the uncanny nightmare valley of that George Lucas movie, which I did watch as a child and gave me nightmares. So that's why I really like this variant. But it's hard to. Glazer's right. Hips don't lie. All right. So now is my personal favorite segment of each and every episode, which is Glazer. Thanks you all.
Wait. I messed up this episode, so I quickly want to say something to Lauren and to Glenn, and then on the last slide, I'm going to do an episode 100 spiel. I'm so sorry. There should have been slides for this, but I deleted them for last week because it was Will and Chris, and I didn't realize I didn't put them back. And I sent this to many people, and no one noticed. So, all right, Lauren, you're on episode 100 because you're my favorite person to be on any of these ever, outside of, obviously, Roy. Hi, Roy. Love you, Roy. But, so, thank you for joining us, and I genuinely think your podcast is the best in the game right now, so keep that going, please.
Well, thanks so much. That's super sweet. You're definitely one of my best friends in the Snap community, and I have every intention of continuing my podcast.
Lauren, will you please remind our loyal listeners and loyal viewers, if they would like to become your loyal listeners and loyal viewers, where to find your podcast?
Yeah, it's Snap on This Pod. You can find that on like Twitter or podcast places, YouTube. It's all over. Just you search for it, you'll find it. You could also search Snap Judgments. I think it'll come up that way too, since we're in the Snap Judgments network, baby.
It's true. We need to figure out how to do that feed. but I don't want to learn things.
Empire.
All right. So, Glenn, first and foremost, thank you so much for being incredibly generous with your time. We all know, if anyone doesn't know this, he does not have to do this for any of us, any of these podcasts. He does it because he's awesome. But more than that, like, I love Marvel Snap. Marvel Snap has transformed my life. It's transformed, I would assume, your life and the lives of everyone here. But you're an incredible steward for this game. It's like the design in this game is absolutely through the roof phenomenal. Thank you so much for, like, I share 4 decks every day. Like, that shouldn't be possible in a game with 12 card decks and this card pool. But, like, it is, and that's a testament to your work, and thank you so much.
Thanks. That's much appreciated. Very sweet of you. I really like working on the game. I'm in general a big proponent of viewing design as a stewardship. Like, we're here to cultivate experiences, and we do it with game pieces. Sometimes they're pictures of dragons. Sometimes they're pictures of ducks. Yeah.
I like the ducks better. All right. Okay,
All right.
Roy, ready?
Now can I do the spiel about the
do your
Patreon?
spiel.
Just real quick, patreon.com/snapjudgments. Remember that our Patreon is a reverse pyramid scheme. Glazer has a very small child and a very kind, beautiful, and understanding wife. The way he justifies doing this is your money goes into the Patreon, so even more of the Glazer family money can go out into the community. So that's how it works. It's a reverse pyramid scheme. So please support us. The best way, or best thing rather, about being a Patreon is Glazer gets to read your name as fast as possible, and him trying to do this in as few breaths as possible brings me joy. It is legitimately my favorite part of every one of his videos and every part of this episode. So go ahead, Aaron. Let's see how fast you can do it.
I'd like to say thank you to Abigail Kiesel, Editor Burnett, Regardless, David Duman, Phil Darwell, Phil Abe, Father, and Dog Gamer, Inc., Guy Frostman, Jane Everett, Thinking Poker, Prime, Ryan Burke, Ryan Wood, Caretix Lee, Quire, Black Dahlia, Parafrost, The Goat Seeker, Archangel 3K, Hollowed, Quid Projo, Doc D, The King of Marvel Snack Card Content, Fat Nick, Mr. Kerfuffle, Ginger Prime, Philip Brackfitch, Haplo, Ken Loggins of the Danger Zone, Rob Silver, and the Bizza, Black Jeebus, XRC, and Skippy G. Happy birthday one last time to Skippy G. Jessica Gamble, hey Jess. Tommy Nyquist, Kinga Bros, Great Kazoo, Kevsey Hoda, Lunacris, Corwin, John Q, Jim McHugh, Clam, 8th Sage, Matcha Priet Models, Green Goblin, Steven, Andrew Flannery, Brian Kaufman, Tristan H. Martin, Jason B, The Fuzzy Law, Spectrumist, Hoot, Matt H, DJ Mike Adjinx, Snowflex, Ocularis, Craig Sterry, BG, Zodrex, The King of Canada, Dent Man, Falcon, Jonesy, Two Ties, Lauren Whatevs, hi Lauren, The Pirate King Tucker, and of course, the Flying Away GunnyT, where the T stands for, Roy.
Well, I get to do the final goodbye for the episode again. Glenn, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate you coming on twice. It's been awesome having you on as our very special guest this week. Thank you so much for making the time for us.
You're welcome. Had a great time. Congrats again on 100.
Thank you. Lauren, thank you so much for being on the show. You are an amazing part of our regular sort of group of guests, very special guests that we have. You can fight with Bootman and Doc D and whoever else I'm forgetting off the top of my head here, because Glazer's ASMR sort of is lulled me into sleep. So who else? Well, Yeti, yes, Yeti, for most frequent guests. So we are really happy to, again, have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me on, and here's to another 100.
All right, Aaron, you said you had a 100 episode spiel that you wanted to do before I do my goodbye. So do you have the 100 episode spiel that you want to do?
Sure, it's really quick. So I obviously want to thank all the dear listeners, especially all the people who were here when we were tiny, way back before. I think our first episode had 3 listeners.
71.
So we've come a really long way.
71.
71 for the first one now, but like that's after a bunch of time, right?
No, that was roughly within like
2-3
months. Yeah.
We started off as home runs here. Either way, thank you so much to our listeners, especially our day ones. But I also want to extend a special thanks to each and every guest we've ever had. This show quickly morphed into a guest of the week thing, and like getting to know the community, getting to promote the community is genuinely one of like the things in my life that makes me happiest. I love this community and I love trying to help it grow. And thank you so much for being a part of that to everyone. Peace and love, everybody.
Definitely. Really appreciate that. I want to just really appreciate our loyal listeners, loyal viewers who stuck with us for 100 episodes. I've really enjoyed doing 95-ish of these episodes. 94, I think, is actually the exact count. It's been a great experience over these last 2 years. I'm really excited for everything Glazer's built in this community. It's amazing, and I'm grateful to be part of it each and every week. And Aaron, I really enjoy it. It brings me massive amounts of joy to do this show with you. So thank you for having me on the show every week.
Wouldn't exist without you, sir.
There we go. All right. So, loyal listeners, loyal viewers, thank you so much for joining us for 100 episodes. As Lauren said, to 100 more. But until then, stay safe, make good choices, and keep on snapping.